Welcome and thank you for standing by. I'd like to inform all parties that the call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Kelly Holloway, U.S. Department of Commerce. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you. And on behalf of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Commercial Service, including our 6 offices in China, the China Business Information Center, and a very strong network of international trade specialists located throughout the U.S., we thank you for joining us today for this webinar. The program is on e-commerce revolution in China, how to sell U.S. products online. A special thanks to the team at Export Now for making today's event possible. We have a great program that I'm anxious to get to. Just a few housekeeping details first to make sure you get the most of the webinar. If at any time you experience technical difficulties, please press *0 for operator assistance. Our program is about 45 minutes long. Following the presentations, we will have ample time to address your questions. We invite you to type those in during the remarks. You'll see a Q&A tab at the top of the screen where you can submit a question at any time. We'll make every effort to answer as many of these as we can during the Q&A session, and we'll focus on the topics of widest interest. We will also provide contact information for presenters where you can follow up directly after the program if we don't get to your question. Know, too, that a recording of today's program and the presentation materials will be emailed to all registrants following the webinar. So on to our program. I am Kelly Holloway with the Department of Commerce's China Business Information Center, which is a clearinghouse of information on doing business with China. We facilitate export education events such as this, have a wonderfully rich website, and a call center where you can speak directly with an international trade specialist. As a global agency, the U.S. Commercial Service has some 108 offices around the country staffed with international trade professionals, and overseas, colleagues fill the commercial sections of U.S. embassies and consulates. And bottom line, their job, all of our job, is to help your company export more. So if you're not taking advantage of it, those resources and their expertise, please do consider doing so. China is our largest overseas presence. In addition to the offices of 6, we have a network of partners in another 13 second-tier cities. On the line today, we have at least one of our senior commercial specialists who tracks the retail and consumer goods sector from Beijing, Mr. Shen Yan. Thanks for joining us, Shen Yan. We'll start our discussion today with your China host, Joshua Halpern, a commercial officer at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Josh leads a team of colleagues around China to help American businesses make local connections, find partners, understand regulations, and other trade support. And following Josh, we'll hear from our featured presenter, Frank Lavin, Global CEO of Export Now. And you'll hear about the Export Now approach to reaching Chinese consumers via the most popular online retail channel in the country, Tmall. And together, they are sure to get you very excited about how attainable online sales to Chinese consumers can be for small and medium-sized American businesses or firms looking to outsource their IT and logistics needs. And I want to give due respect to the impressive, truly, global business and public service backgrounds of these professionals. But at their request, and to allow for maximum time to dig into the topic of selling online in China, we're going to go straight to their presentations. So with that, let me ask Josh to go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Good evening, good morning to everybody, no matter where they're plugging in from. Obviously, we're here over with a team here in Beijing, but we've been working with the entire China Commercial Service to really look at the growing e-commerce market and actually bring a lot of those e-commerce opportunities to our clients. And then we were fortunate enough to link up with Export Now and realize how much more can be done and hopefully move forward to bring that e-commerce platform that's in China to all of you back home in the States. So I'm going to jump right in to articulating a little bit about where the e-commerce market is at right now. We're looking at a total right now, 2011, of 180 million online customers, online users in China, but really you're looking right now 32.4% of those users are actually buying things online. A particularly interesting one that I circled here is just in 2012, we've now surpassed 1/3 of online Chinese internet surfers are actually purchasing items online. Jumping into the e-commerce relative to retail, when we're looking right now at the 2013 projection, we're saying that 6.5% of all retail done in China is going to be conducted online, in comparison with a mature market like the U.S., where 8% of all retail is done actually online. So again, I think everyone on the line is aware that China is booming. What I want to further articulate is how e-commerce is booming. They've really leapfrogged a lot of other already mature markets in terms of their adopting of the e-commerce market. Just some interesting things. What can you buy online? We're looking at a lot of different platforms, but everything from chicken feet, coupons for plastic surgery, Mercedes-Benz, vacation packages, to everything else that you really would buy in Amazon.com, for example, in the U.S. We're looking at again, some more facts that you can read that articulate more about all the different things going on and permutations of that activity going on online in China. Now, just taking a quick look now, and I want to show you when we move on to Taobao and our friends at Export Now, who have a unique partnership with Taobao and Alibaba. I'll let them talk more about that, but I want to show you where that's positioned online so that it's better understood once you dive in. Taobao, obviously the largest online retailer in China and growing every day. It's everything from a C2C, a B2C platform. It's owned by Alibaba. They also own another division of it called Tmall, which is more of a brick and mortar site, which has the requirement of companies being online, being actually physically here in China in order to list things online, which has gotten rid of some of the challenges of IPR. We can go through each one, but today I think I'll just pick out a few. 360 Buy, largest online retailer for consumer electronics. Suning is online for overall electronic appliances. You've got Amazon.com, also doing very well and expanding their warehouses throughout China to meet the needs. These we can follow up with. You're welcome to ask some questions, and we can also follow up offline on those, but that's generally the overall view. Just some quick challenges and opportunities, but I want to preface it by saying a lot of these challenges are actively being pursued and mitigated, so you're actually seeing that because of these challenges being taken care of and changing rapidly, you're seeing an explosion right now, and that's what we're witnessing every day as we're going out into the market. Dynamic competitive market, as we're saying, you're seeing a lot of this right now. A lot of different new sites are bubbling up, but also the main players are getting even more founded in their market. You look at strict regulations. Yeah, there's strict regulations on foreign companies creating their own website, creating their own services here online. But with partnerships like what Export Now is doing with Taobao, you're going to be able to make that a much more fluid process and cut away some of the competition. So immature payment system. Up until now, a lot of the work was done with cash on delivery. There are still a lot of sites online that do cash on delivery, which has created a lot of extra high operational costs. But with Taobao and Tmall, you're actually seeing that they're no longer using cash on delivery. And so as the credit card market, which increases, and the more and more usage rates are going up, you're going to see a lot more growth on the Taobao and the Tmall side, and then ultimately on the overall online. And that's happening right now. Immature delivery system. Up until now, you had a logistics chain that was fragmented. You still have large players like UPS and FedEx not being able to get out to the rural areas, but that's all being taken care of very quickly. They're working on local licensing right now as we speak, and there's a lot of other local players that are filling the gaps. So surprisingly huge penetration on the logistics chain throughout even second, third-tier cities, which is opening up markets further for companies. Even companies that are U.S. brick and mortar in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are finding that they're going to look at e-commerce platforms to get out to some of those places that they don't otherwise have a presence. So you can leapfrog them actually by coming straight through an e-commerce platform to some of these other tiers. Counterfeit products, yes, always an issue here, but a lot of what's happening now is Taobao, for example, is one of the big stakeholders to make sure IPR infringement is reducing. One of the things that they're doing is creating things like Tmall, which requires that brick-and-mortar presence here, or Tmall partnering with Export Now to create kind of a walled garden of U.S. products and give a better branding so that you get a little bit more kind of moving up the chain and a little bit more of a vote of confidence among the e-commerce platforms for your products being actually legitimate. Just quick takeaways. Yes, e-commerce, huge, growing. Logistics, barrier to entry, but Export Now and Taobao partnerships are really starting to move through this issue. Don't let your good name go bad. One of the things that we always want to caution our clients on is before you come over here, especially if you get over so quick as you might with an e-commerce platform and Export Now, take a look at stopfakes.gov. Take a look at the facts, understand better how you can protect your mark over here because you have a first-to-market, first-to-register law here. So if your product, for example, some of our clients found out once they came over here that 10 years ago somebody in China actually registered the name, registered the logo, which actually creates a lot of problems later on. So if you're not even sure if you're coming over but you want to test the market, protect your brand. What can we do? As Kelly alluded to, we do a lot of different things here in commerce, in the commercial service, everything from vetting your targets, promoting your business, providing market intelligence so we can actually give you some feedback, do some looking into some of the companies you're looking to partner with, and on-the-ground matchmaking. A lot of these things are things we would do if you're coming over and you really want to set up shop here. These are things that we can do in conjunction with what you do with Export Now, and we look forward to talking to you further about those. And with that, I want to say we're always welcoming for anybody who wants to come over. Give us a call, give us an email. But right now, let's talk about Export Now, and I'm going to pass it over to Frank. Again, that's our contact information. I'm going to give you 1 minute to, okay, that's it.
And again, the contact information will be circulated to all participants after. I know that screen flashed quickly. You can type questions at any time on the Q&A tab at the top of your screen. Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Josh. Very, very good overview, and thanks everybody on the webinar. I'm sitting here in China, in Hong Kong, so it's early morning here, and I say happy afternoon or evening to folks in the U.S. and good to connect with you. I want to talk a little bit about how our business allows U.S. companies to capture that e-commerce market in China and to do so from their desk or from their factory or their office, meaning up until now, if you wanted to participate in that market, you had to actually figure a way to get to China, and language issues, currency issues, establishing the warehouse, CRM, these range of issues and barriers were somewhat daunting for most U.S. companies, but particularly if you say we don't know what the ultimate upside is, but we want you to take on all of this cost and management expense for the next 6 or 12 months to chase this. The result of which was a lot of U.S. companies said, look, I'm not going to actively pursue China e-commerce, even though the numbers are pretty impressive. So what we tried to set up was a mechanism so that any company can participate in that market and do so without the kind of direct expense and management burden that had previously been so intimidating. And we've got about 15 slides here, and I'll try to walk you through. We know that there's an extraordinary amount of good news in China, and if we look at the left-hand side screen, this is some of the numbers Josh talked about. But it's not just a booming market in terms of GDP growth, but we see consumer spending outpacing overall GDP growth. So GDP growth is in at 9% or so, but consumer spending is at about 30% or 40% growth. So very rapid growth, and as Josh pointed out, e-commerce growth even outpaces that at 50, 60, 70% growth. So there's all sorts of good news in that market on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, though, are the barriers. all of these soft barriers between these neat U.S. companies and accessing that market. And if you don't know what the ultimate revenue is, if you say, look, if I entered that market in a perfect market, I might earn $5 million or $10 million, that's very enticing. But if you say, look, I can't spend 3 years trying to navigate through that to get there. So this was our solution, and it's to make exporting as easily as selling online domestically, so that you can run your China account the same way you would run a U.S. web page, a proprietary web page that your store or factory operates for, the same way you'd operate a platform on a platform in the U.S. such as eBay or Amazon Shops, so forth. So, so we have a online solution and a logistics solution. The online solution means that you register online in English, you deal with U.S. account support, U.S. time zones, U.S. currency, and you only ship domestic if you're only a domestic operation. So you ship to us in Long Beach and we take it to China. The key to all of this, I think, of this slide, the key takeaway is the very bottom clause in boldface, that our model is based on a market entry approach that allows U.S. companies to enter China at their domestic price point and their domestic margin, so that they can compete in China on Chinese terms with the Chinese customers. So for the Chinese customer, your product is posted in Chinese. It's on the top e-commerce platform in China and perhaps the top e-commerce platform in the world. The CRM in China is all Chinese language, as you would hope. It's all Chinese time zones. And as Josh pointed out, you can use Chinese payment instruments. There's different payment instruments to pay. So that all of those soft barriers for the Chinese customer are removed, and all of the soft barriers for market entry for the U.S. merchant are removed. So some of these numbers come from different sources. So just to clarify one point, Tmall is the largest marketplace in the world with 370 million registered users. That does not mean on any given day or any given time frame there are 370 million customers. But still, whether you look at online shopping over last year, 240 million total, or the total number of registered users of 370 million, it's a staggering opportunity. And as Josh indicated, sometime in the next year or two, online penetration of the retail market in China passes the U.S. In terms of penetration, so it goes from 6 to 7 to 8%. Let me take a minute on this slide. It's a bit busy, but I want to just walk through the model. And I've touched on some of these points. But look, number one, the company registers online on our portal. So there's a portal where you can enter product information, shipping information. But the company, the U.S. company, sets the inventory, sets the SKUs, the products, sets the price points, just as if it's running its own web page for the United States. Then in number two, you can get the product to us at our West Coast depot, where we consolidate and take to Shanghai. Or if you're already shipping internationally, you can use your current shipper to get us to us in Shanghai. But we get the products consolidated in three and take them to our bonded warehouse in Shanghai. So for companies that are already reasonably experienced in international shipping, this part of it is discretionary, but we have a lot of terrific U.S. companies that don't do a lot of international shipping, and they're very grateful to have a helping hand participate with them. We get it. I'm up to point number 6. We have a bonded warehouse in Shanghai where we deconsolidate. We put it in the bins. We work with you on translation and photos and posting it on them all. We typically just model the Tmall posting after U.S. posting. Some people don't have U.S. e-commerce, so it's new for them, so we work with them to make sure they have ultimate sign-off on the photo and the look and the description of the products. And then we go to marketing and 8, and as we talked about, the Chinese customer accesses this product the same way they access any other product in China. It's their language, their currency, their time zone, their customer support, so we're able to compete on equal footing with the Chinese competitors of other products. And we do then the order fulfillment at number 9 there, handle all the regulatory financial elements that and remit funds back to the U.S. merchants. So we're acting as a middle office and back office for all the Chinese activity. And we do this, we run a proprietary department store on Tmall. So we have the dedicated U.S. store on Tmall. So anybody in China who's looking for U.S. products, whether it's a neat gadget, whether it's fashion, whether it's children's toys, these wonderful things that come through the U.S. retail system, they can find it specifically on the U.S. department store on Tmall. So just to take a second to make one point about the different platforms and outlets that Josh talked about, because there certainly are a range, but there's one critical difference between our approach, or the Tmall approach, and other outlets. And the difference is this: we are an open platform. We are the only open platform. So as far as I know, the other major sites, every other major site is a closed platform, meaning it's their proprietary platform. They source the goods, they purchase the goods, then they post the goods, and they distribute. So it's their activity. But we operate more on an eBay or Amazon Shops model, that we welcome any merchant, any product range, and who wants to try to access the China market. So we have a range of products, of SKUs, of companies that other places aren't going to have. And we also invite small people, big people, new people, any company at all to participate in this process. So we think over the long run, the open platform, the eBay model, so to speak, just provides a lot more advantages to the merchants, because the merchants decides which product it wants to sell, what price points are, if they want to do a special promotion, and so forth. So it lets the U.S. manufacturer, the U.S. merchant, make all of those commercial determinations themselves as part of the open platform. It does require, for logistics reasons and customer support reasons, it does require, if you want to participate in this program, that we have goods in Shanghai. So we fill orders directly from Shanghai to the Chinese consumer, because one of the key barriers in cross-border e-commerce is that, and we've probably seen this ourselves, if you look at another country's website and you see something interesting for $30 or $40 and you want to purchase it, it might cost $30 or $40 to ship it. So it really kills the deal. So in that case, the company's not really participating in the market. It's really an exotic product, a distant product, and it's not going to have the kind of market penetration it wants. So our model allows the company to participate on local footing, but it does require inventory in advance on consignment in the Shanghai warehouse. But that way, anybody who calls in gets local delivery, local terms, and that cost, that $40 cost of shipping really collapses to very, very small amount. That's why we say you can hit the same price point in China that you have in the U.S. You can have the same margin in China that you have in the U.S. if you use this model. I think Josh has covered most of this. We've touched on these points. It's worth looking at some of this material about where China internet sales are going and how rapidly this market's going. But it doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. And what most business professionals say is very soon China is going to be ahead of the U.S. in terms of total amount of e-commerce sales and total amount of e-commerce penetration, because it's leapfrog technology. It's the same reason developing countries have greater cell phone penetration than landlines, because they just leapfrog the landline. So the point is, China doesn't have the shopping mall density that the U.S. has. China doesn't have the car ownership density that the U.S. has. So the idea of going to the mall and getting your kids back to school clothes is something that's almost obligatory in the U.S., but it's far more common in China to go online. And what we've seen very dramatically is that even when sales are made through traditional channels, the sales discussion and the sales engagement starts online. So the customer looks online, evaluates the prices, compares products and so forth, and then they might very well go to a shopping mall, but that online footprint is part of the overall commercial experience. Some more background on Taobao and e-commerce, and the key point here, I think, is the very last bullet, that in the United States, you might go to Levi's store online to buy your Levi's. In China, you're going to go to Tmall, and on Tmall, there's a Levi's store. and you'd go there to buy online. So it's far more common to go to these open platforms, these massive platforms, rather than go to an individual flagship store. U.S. products are already quite popular on Taobao and Tmall, but the problem is indicated in the last bullet that if you're a major firm, you can set up your store and your warehouse and hire your team and design your web page. So if you're a major store, you can get in the game, so to speak. There's also some mom and pop people who just sort of buy products in the U.S. and bring them back, and you can see those products around too. But it's very hard for the mid-tier company to get in the game because the CapEx and the management burden of setting up e-commerce operations can be so significant. People ask, well, if China's a developing market, what kind of products go through there? Is all kind of low-end products? This was the Daimler smart car that listed a little over $20,000 US, but they seem to do pretty well with high-end products online. We are proud to say that we have just launched our company Export Now in the U.S. 3 weeks ago. We already have 8 partners with us to market in the U.S. We think we're going to have about 50 by the end of first quarter, so we're very proud to be able to offer this services to U.S. companies. We'd be delighted to work with people on this call to see if there's a good fit and if there's a way we could help your company succeed in China as well. And Kelly, thank you for putting this call together. Josh, thank you for your introductory comments. If we're able to go to questions, I'd be very happy to take Q&A.
Terrific. I appreciate your remarks. There is an active stream of questions coming into the Q&A box, so I would appreciate it if Frank, Josh, and the Export Now team that have also joined us can look at those. I want to remind the participants that if you haven't used this feature yet, there's a Q&A button at the top of your screen, and you simply type in the question there and hit submit, and we'll look to answer those that are most relevant. And we have ample time to work through these.
Can I, Kelly, Frank here, I'm on the Q&A button, and I'm seeing some of the, and manage some of the questions. Can we just get into them, or what's the best way of just tackling some of these questions?
Please, why don't you?
On the Q&A tab or the Manage tab within Q&A, please?
In the Manage tab within Q&A. So, for example, okay, a couple of questions have come up, and we'll throw this out at you. It says, does Export Now only deal with consumer products, things one can touch and feel, or
right,
can you also handle services or other types of products?
Right. Well, yes, the e-commerce place right now is Taobao, Tmall is essentially a consumer platform. Consumer products, I should say, are much more broadly defined in China than they typically are in the U.S., meaning you can get into sometimes medical equipment, automobile parts that might not normally be in a normal consumer display in the U.S., so it tends to be more broader. Also, it intends to encompass the wholesale space as well as the retail space, meaning you'll see an item for sale, and there'll be one price, and they'll say, but if you want to buy a gross of these or a dozen of these, here's the other price. So they're clearly orienting that to the wholesale person as well. We do not have any service products on our system right now. I think we're open. Those service products can be more complicated, and the key variable is that it's sold onshore or offshore. But if you'd care to send us a private note about what you envision, we can have a discussion with you if you've got a service idea.
And some other questions about different types of products. A couple have come in about wine, alcohol. Are there any goods that, other than services, that you would not want to get into?
Sure. China, I would say in general, China has the same kind of restrictions about products that the U.S. would have, but they're more liberal and more open in one very important respect. So the restrictions in the U.S. usually have to do with things like registered pharmaceuticals, explosives or firearms or something of that nature, and then there's always sort of cultural sensitivities if it's pornography or God knows what. But so those the same sort of issues, I would encourage people not to get into those product categories online in China. But one area where it's more liberal and more open is with wine and spirits, because it's very tough or more or less impossible in the United States to sell online. It is legal, and it's a huge field in China. So we'd be very happy to talk to you about if you're selling wine or spirits, about how to do that.
And related to that, and then some other product lines questions have come in about registration requirements, product certifications, and things like that. Certainly applicable to wine. What role does your firm play?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There are certain families of products that require independent certification or registration, independent testing, and those would be food products, which is huge in e-commerce for intellectual property reasons, safety reasons. Wine or alcohol, as we discussed, cosmetics, dog food, pet food, and then also electrical appliances have to be, again, similar to the U.S. You have to establish anything that plugs in, not a battery-operated toothbrush, but a plug-in has to be independently licensed and verified. We will work with the U.S. manufacturer on those points, meaning there'll be an extra set of activity that has to take place, forms and so forth, and we do just pass through cost because we're just here to help get you online, and then it's up to the ultimate jurisdiction of the government to make a determination. But we'll work with the U.S. manufacturer merchant to pursue the food licensing requirement and so forth.
A couple of questions have come in relevant to where the website is hosted. And you know, if the people on the line now, can they look at Tmall to see what listings, you know, are like?
Oh yeah, great question. The excuse me, there's two. We're talking about two websites. There's a U.S. website, exportnow.com, which allows the U.S. manufacturer merchant to sign up to work with us. Work through the export portal and so forth, and that's up, although the portal itself is just being put into place. The China website is a store on Tmall, and I'd encourage people, and that goes live in about 10 days or 2 weeks. So we just had our official launch in the United States about 3 weeks ago, meaning we're working directly with merchants. We've got 8 terrific brands we're already shipping to China to put on the store. The store itself goes live in about 2 more weeks. I would encourage people to look at Tmall, which is just TMALL.com, as the platform, and it's, of course, it's all on Chinese, but here's the interesting point. In the search window, you can type in English and you can search in English, so you can at least get a sense of, is your family of products already up there and for sale? What are the price points? How many different merchants are there? Are competitors' products up there and so forth, or similar products? So you can at least click around and type in tennis racket or Levi's or electric toothbrush or anything you want into the pet supplies, kayaks, and so forth, and just see what kind of ideas, what kind of activities up there. Hey, Kelly, I just want to ask one thing, and sorry for a tech question here. But what I'd like to do is put some link, give you a link on the Q&A tab here. Do I do that? Do I do it from the Manage tab?
I will pull up a link for you.
No, I've got a link that I just wanted to share with people on the call because there's just some interesting material. If I can just send it on if people want to click on it and so forth.
Why don't you pose a question and then answer the question, and then all the participants can look in the Q&A box to see it. Either that, or you can type it onto the screen using that the letter feature at the bottom of your.
Oh, all right. Oh, but I can't cut and paste. Sorry. Kelly?
Right.
I'm sorry, broke up there for a second. Can I cut and paste?
If you want to go ahead and send it to me, I'll post it for you.
Okay, that'd be great. And I'll do that. Here's what it is, folks. Sorry for the digression. But McKinsey the McKinsey Consulting Group had just done 2 very interesting studies on consumer behavior in China, and Boston Consulting Group had just done a very interesting study on e-commerce in China, and I think it just gives a little more detail, a little more background to some of the interesting points Josh made. I'm going to forward this to Kelly, and she can post this information. So grateful. Thanks. Sorry, we can go ahead with questions.
A few questions have come up about if you only deal with manufacturers, or can you deal with resellers or consolidators of products? How do you work with those groups?
Right. We deal with anybody from those groups who is the official agent, the designated agent. We can only post on Tmall if we are the original manufacturer or the official representative, official distributor, agent, and so forth. So we will deal with any intermediary party. There are a lot of great U.S. firms that already have China rights, China marketing rights or sales rights have already been given to sold or whatever to a third party. So we're very happy to work with that third party. But it has to be through the official channel. And here's the reason. It's an intellectual property reason. Because there have been problems in China with intellectual property, with fakes, with knockoffs, or whatever, Tmall was established as the site where there is no intellectual property issues. And you do that by saying only the official store may sell the product. If you go to Levi's on Tmall, it's the official Levi's store run by Levi's. So only the official manufacturer, the formal entity, is allowed to sell that product. There's nobody else selling Levi's on Tmall except Levi's. So if we handle your product, we'd be delighted to do it. It has to be with the full authority of the ultimate manufacturer. Whether you on this call are the manufacturer or a consultant or a third party, whatever, that's perfectly acceptable.
A couple of questions have come up about some of the different types of channels, Tmall and others, including TV shopping, how Tmall or Taobao might compare the use of TV shopping. This is more of a general question. If Josh perhaps could start with that.
Sure. I responded in private to Richard. I guess we've been looking at the shopping, and we're getting more and more requests about kind of a QVC, like the online shopping, TV shopping channels. There are a lot of different shopping channels here. One in particular is CNR Mall. But we're just concerned about some of those products tend to be down market, and it's not always the best depending on the product in terms of positioning. But some products they do like, similar to QVC, things for the ladies in our lives who are looking for, they say, a lot of the kind of hair and beauty products, and then they said a lot of other, like, kind of therapeutic, kind of like a Scholl's and the different kind of therapeutic products. But again, we're working with some of the TV shopping channels. We can talk offline more. We're just still a little concerned about where it positions you as a brand, especially if you're coming straight from the U.S. right into an online shopping. But we can talk more offline.
Josh, can I just add a comment on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Frank here. Listen, I think what you said is exactly correct. I would just add that it's a difference between a middle of the bell curve sales model and a long tail model, meaning time on TV is the most important commodity. So what they can put on the TV sales channel is only the hottest selling item, only one item at that for a few minutes. Time is irrelevant on the internet. So we can put every SKU up. We can put the big sellers, the small sellers. We can change. We can experiment. So we've got this long tail. So we literally have people we're working with who have hundreds of SKUs, and we're very happy to put them up. And they'll say quite openly, we're just new to the China market. We don't know what's going to work or what's not. We want to take a kind of broad approach to see what's going on. And e-commerce is just a much better mechanism that lets us get data, get feedback, and understand how the process is going to work.
And along the lines of sort of the bigger picture and how these different channels work together and how U.S. firms can tap into these channels, one of the participants has asked if, to clarify, if products from the U.S. can be placed on Tmall website only, or if a company can design its own website for products to sell in China.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to that. And every company's got a different approach and a different sort of philosophy and a different budget. And we are here to support the U.S. company regardless of what your budget is. So some companies come in and say, look, what I really want is just shelf space in your store because you've got flow in your store, other products in your store, and this is the easiest and fastest ways for me to get a few products out there. Other companies have come to us and said, look, we need a flagship store. Our overall brand is very important. We're making a much more deeper commitment to China. We're going to put in marketing resources, and so we need a flagship store behind us that is our own standalone store. We can also list in your department store, but we've got a flagship store. And then a third permutation, Kelly, which you alluded to, was we can also have a store, just a plain e-commerce site outside of the Tmall platform. We can have our own, and certainly can. I'd say initially that would be viewed largely as an informational platform rather than an e-commerce platform because it just won't have the traffic. But it can be a great place to go for people who have questions or want to have a discussion or want to read a blog. And China has the same digital marketing apparatus as the U.S. does, where people have the equivalent of Facebook pages and LinkedIn and big tweets and so forth. And so a lot of companies have that digital marketing establishment to complement the actual sales channel. So we can work with you on any of these kind of permutations.
Can either of you comment on the the craft market in China? Is that a growing area? Is that a product line that would do well on the Tmall?
I'll try to add some input. I mean, certainly, I do think that there is a growing number of custom-made products and people creating their own things, selling them in as a craft market style, kind of like an Etsy, if you're referring to like an Etsy.com. But I don't know if it's significant enough to really speak about right now. But we'll take a look at it, and feel free to email me, this is Josh, directly, and we can take a deeper look.
And I would like to point out that if the participants look on their Q&A list, they'll see that the URL links that Frank had alluded to earlier, they're posted there now.
And I just want to say, we're getting a lot of comments, and maybe Frank, you can speak to. So how soon before you get to start exporting to other countries? You got requests for Japan and elsewhere. That's always a good sign. But
Sure. We'd love to do that. We'd love to go to other countries. What we can say, what we're doing with China is there's at least 2 or 3 things going on with China. It's the second largest economy in the world after the U.S., so it's the biggest market in the world outside our borders. And secondly, for most Americans, typically it's the least accessible market, meaning American firms can generally find out some way to get into the European markets and so forth, and Canada, Mexico that are more accessible, but China's just got a degree of difficulty. So for all those reasons, we wanted to start in China and get that going. But you're absolutely right. Once that gets going, we're very keen to get looking at other markets as well. But it's not going to be in the next few months, so I can say that.
And I'm assuming, Frank, that
I'm not sure if we touched on the question about cosmetic registration for cosmetic products. Hello?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. I can just speak briefly. When you come through, to commercial service, and we're looking at bringing cosmetic products into the brick-and-mortar retail network we have, we usually have partners here that will help with the registration process and other contractors that are really familiar with the process. But it is a good question. In terms of Export Now, with the different kinds of products that come through, to what degree does Export Now help make that process a little more fluid?
Another theme to the questions is about content, U.S. content. If you're requiring 100% content for the U.S. content for the firms that you work with, what if portions of the firm's product lines are actually made in China?
Right. Let me touch on that. We're an American platform, and we're happy to help American firms, but we also realize full well that means different things at different times. And you've got terrific American companies that have some soaring or production even in China or in a third country. And so we're happy to work with them, regardless of where the product is sourced or manufactured. But as long as we're honest to the Chinese consumer about what we're selling, we're not going to say made in America if it's not made in America. But if it's an American brand, an American company, that's perfectly fine, and we're happy to work with them.
And quite a few questions about fee structure, that type of thing. I'm assuming that those queries should be sent to Export Now directly.
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk to you about it, but let me just give an outline on that, because my guess is that's something that everybody's got in the back of their head about saying, okay, this might fit. This sounds kind of appealing, but what's the price tag? And there's two elements of a fee structure. There is a sign-up fee, which just helps us get our fixed costs, get you online, get that first shipment to Shanghai, and get you posted. So there's a sign-up fee, and then there's a transaction fee based on just gross volume. So the actual dollar amounts, of course, then are driven by sales. But the transaction fee, the sign-up fee is $3,000 for 1 year posting. So that gets you 1 cubic meter of product, one family of product from Long Beach to Shanghai, and in the bin, deconsolidated through customs, translated online, trademark registration. So a set of activities around that $3,000 that gets you on the platform. Then the transaction fee, it depends a little bit on which product, family product, because there's different tariffs at Taobao with different fee structure as well. But it usually ends up being in the 15 to 20% range, gross range. So there's a Taobao fee, if you will. There's our fee. That's the cost side. The benefit side is, remember, there's no distributor, there's no wholesaler, there's no retailer. So we say even with China's VAT, China has a value-added tax of 17%. So even with China's 17% VAT, we believe for most companies, your total cost in getting to consumer will be more or less the same in China as the U.S. That all of these additional costs are offset by the fact there's no distribution middlemen. So that's why we say in the PowerPoint, you can more or less hit the same price point in China that you have in the U.S. and more or less the same margin as well.
And for the actual product pricing, is it Export Now, or is it the manufacturer that determines pricing to consumer?
The manufacturer sets the pricing just as the manufacturer would for their own web page or for Amazon or eBay back in the U.S. The manufacturer controls this. We would certainly like to have a conversation about this and like to be as constructive as possible about it and give some thoughts as to where you're trying to go and so forth. But our general advice in entering China is try to enter at the same price point you have in the United States, where you already have established there is a market, you can be successful at that price point, and so forth. Indeed, if you look at what some of the majors do, if you look at what McDonald's does in China or what Starbucks does in China or what Levi's does in China, you'll see they very much follow that approach, that the Starbucks coffee costs essentially the same in China as it does in the United States, and Starbucks are doing extremely well, but with it, it might mean they have much smaller penetration in China than in the United States because there's less purchasing power, but that's at least somewhat offset by the fact that the country's 4 times as large, so you don't necessarily need precisely the same penetration.
And how about returns? How are those handled?
You mean returns from the consumer to us in the warehouse, or returns from us in the warehouse to the U.S. manufacturer? Let me touch on both, because there's at least 2 levels of returns here. So on the retail side, from the ultimate consumer in China, Tmall, the platform, requires a policy of all merchants. We subscribe to it that is a 7-day return policy. So the Chinese consumer has 7 days to return. Now, that gives the consumer confidence, and that allows them to buy from a merchant they've never heard of or to try something out. So we think that's a very powerful sales tool. It helps us go faster, but it also protects the merchant. It protects us because the return policy requires actual physical return of the product at the customer's expense. So the scope for fraud, we think, is very, very limited. The customer actually has to box it up and ship it up and say the tennis racket was the wrong tennis racket or defective or whatever. But then we will refund the money. So there is a return policy, a standard return policy on the Chinese side, which we think is very helpful. We also then on our side, vis-a-vis facing off the U.S., we have to have a return policy because we're going to have some merchants who, in the course of their year of activity or at the end of the year of activity, say, look, I've got SKUs that aren't working, or I've got a whole family of products aren't working, or I'm at the end of my year and it hasn't worked, and you've still got inventory in China. So we've got 2 or 3 options, and of course we work with you in the course of the year, so it's not we could look at adjusting prices or special promotions or other kind of activity in the year. I think swapping out SKUs in the course of the year is going to be a reasonably common activity for many companies because they're experimenting in the market. So we're very happy to work with you on that basis, on it's just a pay-go basis, right? Because what we're trying to do at Export Now is the exact same activity that the manufacturer merchant's trying to do, which is to say, how do we get transaction volume up? How do we get sales as effectively as possible? And if that requires alterations in price points or colors or sizes, then let's do it. So we're very happy to work with the U.S. company on changing the product mix and price points and so forth throughout the year. But let's take a worst-case scenario at the end of the year that there's still inventory there, that it hasn't worked in a commercial sense. Then we've basically got 3 options. We can roll over for another year and keep trying. We're happy to do that. We can liquidate the goods, discount and liquidate. The merchant sets the price, or we can return the goods. So by the way, this would be not terribly different, I think, than what would happen in a similar setting domestically. I mean, there's only a few things you can do. But the goods belong to the U.S. company, and we're happy to get them back to the U.S. company.
Well, we have kept our participants on longer than the time originally allocated. Did you want to touch on any of the other questions before we wrap up, Frank?
Well, let me just say this. We've gotten a few questions in the system that are very interesting that I haven't been able to respond to in the course of this discussion because we did have to kind of stick to the general ones. If people want to follow up with us, we'd be just delighted to have a chat. We've got a U.S. team that will probably put you in touch with that can answer the mechanical questions a little more easily. When you come out to China or have China questions, we're very happy to call in from Hong Kong or Shanghai and have that discussion as well. But on the very last slide, Kelly, is the contact information, and you get info at Export Now or sales at exportnow.com are 2 great places to go. I just want to thank you, Kelly, and thank Josh, and thank everybody on this webinar. It's been a very interesting chance to have this discussion.
Perfect. And Josh, did you have any last comments that you wanted to make to the participants?
No, similar to what Frank said, too. If you want anything specific to what the commercial service can do or stuff that's related to getting into the market on the ground here, feel free to email me as well. And Frank and I and our teams are working in tandem, so anything that one of us isn't able to answer, the other one will. And again, it's just been a great pleasure. I think this is probably the largest webinar, I think, in CS history, or from what I hear. In terms of participants, not sure. We'll clarify those numbers later, but again, a lot of that's due to Kelly's work on the ground in the U.S. and, of course, the wonderful product of Export Now that we definitely support. So, again, thank you again, and we're signing out from Beijing.
I want to thank all the participants, our speakers, Export Now, Frank Lavin, and your team for making this possible, bringing a really compelling approach to U.S. firms, and we look forward to following up with you with these additional questions. Please, participants, don't be shy. Send your questions, and we'll work to address every single one of them. A reminder that we'll be sending a link to a recording of today's program to you later in the week. You'll be able to listen to that at your convenience. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you.
That concludes today's call. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.
You are on hold for a conference call. Please press *0.
So we're on a